Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking at something you literally use every single day, probably without even giving it a second thought. We're going to reframe how you think about your own mouth. We're not just looking at it as a simple opening, we're going to decode it together as a highly specialized, multifunctional biological factory. It's an absolute marvel of engineering, and by the end of this, you'll see exactly why.
Okay, let's dive right in by formally defining our subject. In anatomical terms, we are talking about the buccal cavity, which is the specialized structure sitting right at the very beginning of the alimentary canal. You can think of the alimentary canal as this long, incredibly complex biological conveyor belt of digestion. And the buccal cavity? Well, that's the crucial entry point. It's basically the loading dock where nutrition first enters the system.
But it is so much more than just a loading dock. What's truly fascinating about the oral cavity is exactly how it handles multiple, massive responsibilities all within one confined space. It acts as the primary site for both mechanical and chemical digestion, meaning it physically breaks things down and chemically alters them at the exact same time. On top of all that heavy lifting, it's a critical, highly sensitive component of our respiratory system for breathing and our phonetic system for speaking. It is literally the ultimate multitasker. So here's our roadmap for today. First, the oral cavity blueprint. 2, boundaries, defining the space. 3, the essential heavy machinery. 4, saliva and physiological functions. And finally, 5, microscopic armor, oral histology.
Let's get right into it with number 1, the oral cavity blueprint. Just like any highly efficient factory, this space needs to be physically isolated from the external environment to control exactly what goes in and what goes out. Now look at the incredible contrast in the architecture here between the top and the bottom of this cavity. The superior boundary, the roof, is actually divided into 2 parts. You have a rigid, bony, hard palate at the front, which provides a solid surface to crush food against, and then a dynamic, muscular, soft palate at the back. Contrast that with the inferior boundary, the floor of the mouth. There's zero bone down there. It is entirely composed of muscle, primarily the tongue, which is supported by sublingual tissues and the mylohyoid muscles underneath. It's a brilliant design, honestly. A solid roof to press against and a highly mobile floor to actually do the pressing. Moving right along to section 2, boundaries, defining the space.
To complete this physical map, we need walls to contain our heavy machinery and completely isolate the space from both the outside world and the nasopharynx. Anteriorly, right at the very front, we have the lips, or labia. Sure, they form the entryway, but functionally, they are absolutely crucial for physically containing food so it doesn't just spill back out. Laterally, on the sides, we have the cheeks, known anatomically as the buccae, which are composed largely of the buccinator muscles. These keep the food continuously pushed toward the center of the mouth. And finally, the posterior boundary at the back is the oropharyngeal isthmus. This is the opening leading down into the oropharynx, and it's heavily guarded by the uvula and the palatoglossal arches to strictly control when materials actually exit the buccal cavity.
Which brings us to part 3, the essential heavy machinery.
To do the actual work inside this highly secure, contained space, we obviously need physical tools. 32. That is the magic number here. This represents the typical adult dentition count. 32 individual tools permanently mounted into the jaws, responsible for mastication, which is just the technical term for chewing.
But we don't just have 32 identical blocks. Well, actually, think of it more like a highly specialized toolkit with distinct classes of tools for very specific jobs. You've got your incisors at the front for precise cutting. Right next to them, the canines for tearing. And then, moving toward the back, you find the heavy-duty equipment, the premolars and molars, which are designed strictly for grinding. By breaking food down into smaller and smaller particles with these varied tools, the teeth are crucially increasing the total surface area of the food. And maximizing that surface area is absolutely vital for enzymatic action to take place later on. But the teeth completely rely on a material handler, and that handler is the tongue. The tongue is an incredibly powerful muscular organ with some wildly diverse roles. First, manipulation. It constantly maneuvers food between the teeth to facilitate chewing, ultimately packing that processed food into a ball called a bolus so we can swallow it safely. Second, it's our central hub for gustation. The tongue is covered in these tiny bumps called papillae, which house taste buds containing sensitive chemoreceptors. These detect a whole spectrum of stimuli: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. And third, entirely separate from digestion, the tongue rapidly changes its physical shape to modulate sound for speech articulation. All right, on to section 4, saliva and physiological functions. Now, mechanical breakdown is really only half the story here. The buccal cavity is constantly being bathed in fluid by its very own dedicated plumbing system. This system is driven primarily by three pairs of major salivary glands. You've got the parotid glands, the submandibular glands, and the sublingual glands. And those are supplemented by numerous minor glands scattered all throughout the cavity. They are basically working around the clock to secrete saliva.
Because saliva isn't just water, right? It's a highly complex chemical payload. Let's unpack exactly what's inside. First, it contains salivary amylase. This is an enzyme that instantly initiates chemical digestion right there in your mouth, breaking down complex carbohydrates into simpler sugars like maltose. Next is mucin, a glycoprotein that coats the food bolus, acting as a slick lubricant to make swallowing safe and efficient. Finally, saliva is armed with lysozymes and IgA. These are protective agents acting as your body's initial immunological defense system, working to neutralize pathogens before they can make it any further down into the alimentary canal.
So when we put all these anatomical structures and chemical secretions together, we get this incredible, comprehensive matrix of physiological functions. Let's walk through exactly how the cavity operates as a multifunctional system. We have ingestion, which is simply taking in the raw materials, then mechanical digestion, where mastication physically breaks down those structures. Chemical digestion is happening simultaneously as salivary enzymes begin the hydrolysis of starches. Then comes deglutition, which is just a great scientific word for swallowing, where the tongue coordinates the propulsion of the bolus right into the pharynx. Completely separate from the food pathway, we have phonation, using the lips, tongue, and teeth to create complex speech sounds. And finally, the sensory function, acting as a vital scanner detecting the texture, temperature, and chemical composition of literally everything that enters. But honestly, when you look at that list, you kind of have to wonder, with teeth forcefully grinding, enzymes chemically breaking down biological matter, and constant friction against the walls of the cheeks, how does the mouth itself survive this incredibly violent, high-stress environment day after day? And that takes us right into our final section, microscopic armor, oral histology. The answer to that survival question actually lies at the cellular level. Notice how the tissue strategically adapts based on the exact amount of mechanical stress it has to face. Most of the oral cavity is lined with a non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. It's resilient but flexible. However, the body is incredibly smart. In areas subject to drastically higher friction, like the gingiva, which we commonly call the gums, and that bony hard palate we talked about earlier, the epithelium actually upgrades itself. It becomes keratinized. It adds a tough, rigid layer of protein specifically to provide heavy-duty protection against serious abrasion. The source material actually sums up the purpose of this microscopic lining perfectly, describing it simply as resilient to the mechanical stresses of chewing. It is just sheer biological durability, engineered over millennia to withstand the relentless, daily mechanical stress we put it through just to fuel our bodies. So the next time you take a bite of your favorite food, or even just say a single word, I really hope you pause to appreciate the extraordinary, coordinated effort of the hard palate, the muscular floor, your specialized dentition, and the sheer chemical brilliance of your salivary glands. And it leaves us with a pretty exciting thought. Given the immense microscopic complexity required just to power this one entryway, what other incredible, unseen biological factories are operating flawlessly inside you right now? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking questions about the amazing machine that is the human body.